Lecture.com. This is International Master William Paschall. Today we're going to continue my new series called Spastacular Attacking Miniatures, a tribute to Boris Spasskys' quickest and most beautiful games. One of the things that I love about Spasskys is his just universal style that's so strong both positionally and tactically, and his ability to play both d4 and e4 also equally universally. So we're going to give you a sample of both. The part 3 that we're going to start now is the first game I think in the series that we've seen him play d4. And of course our favorite Spassky opening we're going to feature here now. d4, and this is a game from Bucharest, Romania, 1953. Spassky is playing the English master Harry Golombek. So d4, knight f6, c4 from Spassky, e6 from Golombek, knight to c3, and taking up the challenge with the Nimzo, Golombek here with bishop b4. And I guess this is how the following move got its name. The world champion from Leningrad here with bishop g5, so-called Leningrad variation, I think basically kind of called the Spassky variation by some people. And the #1 player who popularized the system, I believe. So bishop g5, some players in modern times have played it, like I believe Boris was an exponent for this. But anyway, c5, d5, this is the main line. Black has other ways to play, of course. You know, he could transpose to kind of Queen's Gambit with d5. He can play, you know, castles. Not so common to castle right away, but you don't have to play c5. There are alternatives. But anyway, c5, d5 is the main line. If white doesn't play d5, he doesn't really challenge black's setup. Then h6, which is fine. Bishop h4. And here, black plays e5. This move is a little unusual in the sense that this is not the most common order of moves. I think most commonly you see d6 in this position. I'm not sure it's really exploitable in any way. e5, and then Spassky plays the standard move here, which is e3. White has to be careful, of course, not to play e4 because of the threat of g5, and then he takes e4. So e3, and d6 now from Golombek. And honestly, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't exchange bishop takes knight here on c3. I think this is a mistake, honestly. You know, he has a chance to double the pawns. Kind of the goal of the Nimzo-Indian is to inflict double pawns on white, one of the goals, and there's just no reason not to do it here. So he's only giving himself problems by leaving this bishop kind of hanging out to dry on b4. So d6, and at this point white could already avoid doubled pawns if he wanted to by playing queen c2. I think that's quite a reasonable move for white here. Instead, Spassky plays bishop d3, which would transpose to kind of main line after bishop takes c3, b takes c3, e4. But black instead goes on some kind of crazy tangent here with b5. And this move is just asking too much from the position. There's nothing wrong with the Benko gambit, if you will, but in this particular position, it doesn't really have a lot of bite in this kind of Czech Benoni sort of pawn structure. Many times in the King's Indian, b5 doesn't really work that well. Time-consuming, weakening. Black needs to worry about development, and so this position is just not the right spot for this Benko gambit type of break. If he didn't play e5, there are some lines where black plays c5 and b5 without playing e5, but it's definitely over the top to play c5, e5, and b5. It's just too time-consuming and leaving development behind. So b5, c takes b, and here already black is going to try something tricky. So he plays g5 and bishop g3, and as you can see, this bishop is a difficult piece to play in these lines. I mean, there are definitely situations where the bishop is quite in danger of getting locked out of the game. but it's not guaranteed to be locked out of the game because we might get in a break with f4 at some point down the line. and h4 is a standard break. But what black has given up a lot here in terms of weakening his pawn structure and letting his development kind of lag. And what he's doing is kind of opening the game. Now, bishop b7 is a move he could simply take on d5. I think it would lead to the same thing as in the game, basically. So, not necessary to play bishop b7. I'm not saying it's an outright mistake. Bishop b7, and now knight e2. Now, Spassky could simply play e4 here. And I think just be a pawn up in general. But he decided that he liked the idea of Golombek winning his pawn back because he has so many positional weaknesses. And this is Spassky in his pure kind of positional mode. You know, he's still using tactics, little tactics here in this game, but it's basically Spassky playing in a fully positional style. So knight on g to e2, getting developed, offering up the d5 pawn, and black takes it. Knight takes d5. And right now you just see all these weaknesses, h5, f5. The pawns are forward on g5. That looks weak. The d6 pawn is backwards along d5. And this is really the main feature, the main strategic feature of the position that Spassky is going to exploit here. So yes, black has a strong center, but it's kind of inflexible and weakened. He has a big center, shall we say, not a strong center, but a big pawn center there. But it's hard to mobilize it. You know, the e5 pawn isn't protected. That bishop's doing a job by keeping pressure on the e5 pawn. So knight takes d5, then simply castles, and Spassky gives the material back, but there's just weaknesses all over the board for black. And the bishop on b4 doesn't know what to do with itself. So castles, now knight d7, and this may have been a kind of positional mistake, allowing Spassky to gain control of the d5 square and therefore gain a really significant positional advantage. So probably it's kind of counterintuitive, but Golombek's best move would have been to play knight f6 in this position and simply go back, which would have ensured that he's able to maintain some control over the central squares e4 and especially d5. But this is a sort of deep idea, to move the piece again, not to lose complete control there. Instead, he made this routine developing move with knight d7. This is where Spassky takes over now. Bishop to e4. This is a sort of pseudo pawn sacrifice, but the positional idea behind it is very, very strong. So we're just getting control of the d5 square with everything we have. And it's a very weak square for black. And behind it is a weak pawn. And if that pawn falls, then the whole pawn structure on c5 and e5, everything's going to fall apart. The whole complex will fall apart. So bishop e4, black has two choices here. He plays bishop takes c3. And I don't think it makes a big difference which way he takes on c3. He could take with the knight. If he plays knight takes c3, we'll play knight takes c3. And if bishop takes e4, knight takes e4, and black is in big trouble with the d6 pawn. So he's basically strategically losing. Instead, he played bishop takes c3, and now, of course, white must take on d5. I guess he can't play any other move here without losing material. So he's sacrificing a pawn more or less temporarily on b2. Bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, and black probably should bring the bishop back to a5. As horrible as the bishop looks, kind of out of play and passive, that's the best way to play the situation. And it also would have kept the knight kind of in check from coming to c3, getting in the game. Although if bishop a5, queen takes d6, white has a huge advantage, it's not completely over. But in the game, I think after bishop takes b2, black has too many weaknesses and his development is too far behind, and he's even having trouble getting his king out of the center. So here Spassky surprises a little bit. He could have played rook b1, kind of gain a tempo, but instead he played rook d1, getting pressure just to bear straight down into the center here. And black, I guess, could castle in this position. Instead he played bishop a3. He's worried about his bishop getting trapped. Yeah, if castles, I have to be corrected. He cannot castle because he gets his bishop trapped with queen b3. So that's a mistake. He must play this move or another move of some sort that saves the bishop. bishop a3. And I think you might be thinking about something like c4, sacrifice the pawn and bring the bishop back to c5. So now finally queen takes d6, breaks the pawn structure, e5 is falling, the black king is stuck in the center. He still has a million weak squares like f5, e4, h5. And Spassky, this game is pretty short. It's not a really short miniature, but Spassky's able to get a pretty much winning strategic advantage here by move 17. Queen takes d6, queen e7, and now Spassky makes a mistake. He really could have put black away, I think, here with queen a6. I just don't see any really rejoinder for black. If queen a6, bishop b4, obviously a3 wins a piece. So knight b8 doing nothing because of, well, at least queen a4. So that would trap the piece. Instead, black can play c4, but then rook takes d7 is sort of murderous. So, I mean, this is the best black could have gotten, like queen takes d7, queen takes a3, with massive advantage for white, where the two pieces have to be better than the rook. Anyway, so maybe Spassky didn't like it, I don't know, but it certainly looks good enough to win. Instead, he played queen c6, which is a good move, the second best move. And then rook d8, and now you see the importance of the open file. Breaking the pawn chain gave this bishop real hope to get back in the game via e5. And meanwhile, this knight is getting in the game. So this is the decisive maneuver here. Knight c3, threatening knight d5 or even knight e4. And black has really lost the battle for control of key central squares. And his king side is weakened. He's barely allowed to castle here. He does castle. The other possibility, I guess, would be something like queen to e6. But I was thinking that in this case, rook d6 is even game over. So he pretty much has to castle. Knight d5 now, and again, basically hard to imagine a move here other than queen e6. And the following is forced. Queen takes e6, f takes e6, knight e7 check. The king moves up, it has to move up, and then knight c6. And this is the winning move. Basically winning the exchange on d8 and increasing the pressure on e5. A lot of things. f4 is a threat. It's been a kind of threat in the air since the opening, but now it's looking really dangerous. So I don't know what black's supposed to play here. I don't see a really viable move. So he played king e8, and again, it's kind of hard to recommend anything for black at this point. So I think if you did try to maybe move another move, I just couldn't even guess what it would be. King e8, rook d3. This is strong. This way he's able to double up with tempo. So rook d3, bishop b2, and rook d1, and overwhelming threats. Notice he doesn't cash in for the material. He just increases the pressure. And they're really, really nasty threats like rook d6. So Spassky not in a hurry to cash in his chips here. For the exchange, he instead increases his position, increases his advantage before gaining material. So Golombek resigned here, 25 moves in. I thought this was a good kind of introduction to Spassky playing the Leningrad. Obviously, Golombek didn't really know what he was doing. He tried an experimental idea with the early b5 in tandem with c5 and e5, and I think it's too much to combine e5 and b5. e5 is kind of a solid move, creating a closed structure, and b5 is this dynamic Benko-like pawn sacrifice. I think Golombek just asked for too much trying to combine those two ideas. But later, again, trying to win the pawn on d5 by weakening his king side and losing control of a lot of central squares. Perhaps Golombek's only chance was to go back with knight on d to f6 and try to keep some control of the center. But excellent execution by Spassky, kind of a classic positional Spassky game, showing the dimension of Spassky where he's just monstrously strong in strategy, closed position with knights on the board, just brutal. So thanks for joining us here for part 3 of Spastacular Attacking Miniatures. This is International Master William Paschall for ChessLecture.com.